You're listening to Talking Africa, the podcast that gets behind the news from the continent. It's brought to you by the Africa Report and Jeune Afrique Media Group. My name is Patrick Smith and welcome to the pod. This week we have Piers Pigou of the International Crisis Group, whose team in Southern Africa have just published an investigation into the mining industry in Zimbabwe. It's called All That Glitters Is Not Gold: Turmoil in Zimbabwe's Mining Sector. This year, Zimbabwe has seen a surge of attacks by gangs linked to the fast-growing artisanal mining industry, taking hundreds of miners' lives. 2 weeks ago, a shaft at a gold mine in Bindura collapsed after heavy rains trapping tens of young miners as the mine flooded. Violent gangs sponsored by politicians and business people, together with these appalling working conditions, are blighting the lives of these young miners. Industry sources say about $1.5 billion of gold each year is being smuggled out of Zimbabwe, depriving the country of much-needed revenues. In this podcast, Piers Pigou explains these latest developments and looks at some ideas to make the industry work for all Zimbabweans and take it out of the hands of the criminal cartels. So traditionally, Zimbabwe's mining sector was dominated by the giant companies of the region. There was Anglo-American and De Beers, and a number of Australian, Canadian, and US companies all showing interest in the mining sector. What seems to have happened is that a lot of those big conglomerates have given up on the country and have closed their mines down, and then these mining properties have fallen into contention, if you like. Can you explain what's going on with those mining properties and the whole issue around who owns the gold in Zimbabwe now, and why that's turned into such a tricky legal problem?
Yes, well, mining operations around gold in Zimbabwe are very diffuse. You find gold mining across the country. You don't find massive deposits and the kind of massive gold mining operations that you found in the Witwatersrand, for example. These are much smaller operations, and this has always been the way in the gold mining industry. It's smaller industrial interventions and what we've seen in the last few years, small-scale mining operations that have been growing to address the production challenges. But at the same time, we've not seen an investment in exploration by the larger mining operations, which of course involves money and risk-taking, which smaller operations do not either have the capacity or the appetite for. So a number of operations in the country are continuing, reasonable-sized industrial mines, but within extremely difficult circumstances, particularly in terms of securing adequate liquidity, foreign exchange to continue operations, and a very difficult sales and gold buying environment for larger operations being forced to buy at a particular rate and being paid a percentage of that money in Zimbabwe's local RTGS dollar currency. And this doesn't really incentivize miners, the larger scale miners, to invest and build their programs, and makes the environment extremely difficult for them to do so. In this context, you've seen a growing number of small scale miners, many of whom are associated and linked to various levels of political organization with the ruling party, which feeds into kind of mutating patronage systems. And then you have linked also within this environment a burgeoning number of artisanal miners, the guys that are operating with their picks and spades and are going underground. Now, we've seen a significant growth in the volumes of gold production coming from those small-scale miners and the artisanal sector. and they've overtaken production in terms of volume from the larger scale miners. As I said, some of whom are continuing to operate relatively effectively, but large numbers of them really struggling to do so. And some of their operations have been effectively mothballed, mines put into care and maintenance, and some of these are now being hoovered up by politically connected actors within the Zimbabwean political economy.
Right. Could you give us paint a picture of these artisanal miners? These are predominantly young Zimbabweans, mainly men, but there are women involved, it seems. Tell us what sort of people they are, what conditions they're working under. I mean, how deep do they go? How risky the whole project is?
Well, it varies from place to place, and of course, and no one really knows the true extent of the numbers that are involved. People talk about up to 1 million people now involved in the sector, and this is just
that's out of a population of 15 million, right?
Correct. And you've seen a number of people. A lot of people have moved from, as the economy has informalized, you find people from all different sectors and communities involved, from people who were teachers through to students. Some come part-time, some are there on a seasonal basis. If the agricultural economy doesn't require their labor, they look elsewhere to do this. The sector itself is very diffuse, and I think there is a danger in seeing what's often called the ASM, the artisanal and small-scale mining sector, as some kind of homogenous block. This is certainly not the case, and you get different levels of organization and sophistication within that sector. Most of the artisanal miners are operating within what are called syndicates, small groups of miners, between 5 and 10, maybe up to 20, operating with a sponsor who's often a politically connected individual who will provide financing for that syndicate to operate in a particular area. In one of the mines that we looked at, for example, Jumbo Mine, which belonged to the Metalon Corporation before it was sold, we understand, to Kuda Tagwere and his
we ought to
interests.
get back to that issue, yeah.
Which we will. But you know that mine had a set of different a range of different operations in terms of these syndicates, from smaller groups, and we spoke to people who were operating in small groups of 3 to 6 that were going down into the mines, often entering the mines through ventilation shafts, sliding down the mines with provisions, spending sometimes 3 to 4 days underground with their provisions, where they would find an area in the mine, sometimes very deep, over 150 meters down, into the mine, where they would be hacking away to fill their bags with high-grade ore to bring to the surface. They bribed their way into the facility and bribed their way out. They also had to navigate the dangers of more organized, larger and more violent syndicates operating underground. One gang, known as the Barcelona Gang, for example, had up to 200 members underground at one time, sometimes spending as long as 3 weeks underground, bringing supplies and ore up and down, but with people, as I said, effectively living underground, hacking away at various seams that they could find, and also, as I was indicating in the Ndura case, attacking the pillars as well, which often have high-grade ore seams in them. So, you know, it's a pretty desperate business. You know, above ground, you find that artisanal miners operating in pits, in more open cast mining, and competition around those pits, often peppered with violence and tensions and pressures. There's no real form of law and order. It's the power of the most powerful that control the situation there. And living in shanty areas, which are set up, these kind of makeshift camps and cabins that are set up, and sometimes running small economies with bars and brothels and all sorts of things going on in some of in the larger and more sophisticated areas in terms of mine invasions. In other areas, it may well be just a handful of people moving into a particular area and trying their luck with small-scale underground mining or indeed open pit mining. It's largely men involved, although in the small-scale mining sector, where there is a number of women that are operating successful mining operations and have been working closely with the more organized sector of the ASM groupings, the mining federations and cooperatives that have been able to work and produce and develop their capacity at that level. But there is serious challenge for women miners within a context which is heavily dominated by men. And a number of women miners have also become vulnerable to the violent antics of some of the gangs that are preying on other artisanal and small-scale miners that are making the production. So what you find is that some of the violent gangs are actively involved in mining themselves, and some simply prey on the mining activities of others in the sector.
Right. So we've got a picture where these young Zimbabweans in the artisanal small-scale sector, they're operating, they have very little, if any, legal protection. The police who are meant to be patrolling these areas of high security, given the value of the mineral assets therein, are not doing their job. We're in a position where the sector is really spinning out of control. Is that true to say?
There really is, Patrick, an environment of lawlessness that is associated with this sector. However, it varies from area to area in terms of the selective application of law and the role being played by the police, for example. In some areas, the police have certainly attempted to contain and control and push back against illegal activities. In other areas, the police have effectively had to have been bought by mining operations to come and do their job. So in some areas, we've seen the support unit, for example, the riot police of the police, have their activities to push back against mine invasions have been underwritten by some of the mining companies. In other areas, the police have been complicit in enabling access to illegal areas and exact rents from artisanal miners. And we've seen also in some areas that the sponsors of syndicates may themselves be police officers. So it's a mixed bag out there, but the general takeaway, there is a burgeoning law and order problem. Now, we saw this manifesting in a significant increase in the number of violent incidents during 2019 and the number of murders and killings in some of these areas. Police have tried to confront and in some instances, police themselves have been attacked and one or two have been murdered by some of these gangs that have been pushing back. In January this year, the police launched a massive operation to address the machete gangs, as they were called. And in that process have arrested thousands and thousands of artisanal miners, the bulk of whom probably legitimate artisanal miners not involved in machete gang activities, but have been arrested by virtue of not having legal permits to operate. Now, most miners don't. There was a kind of de facto decriminalization of the artisanal sector a few years ago as part of the attempts to access the gold that they were mining into the formal buying system of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. And so it's been the application of controlling this sector has been open to manipulation. Let me put it that way. And this has been has enabled the police in terms of its rent-seeking opportunities.
And I guess, although your research went back, I think, into last year and the early part of this year, given the increase in the international gold price, partly influenced by the public health crisis and the pandemic, the gold has become a much more valuable commodity across the world. And presumably the gold mining sector, particularly the informal artisanal sector in Zimbabwe, is increasing pretty fast at the moment. Have you picked up trends like that?
Well, in terms of the expansion of the sector, it's not entirely clear. It's been difficult to monitor this in the
Hmm.
context of COVID. We've not been back into the country to conduct research. But
Right.
certainly, artisanal activities have continued throughout this period. In fact, gold mining was given a kind of emergency service status under the auspices of COVID regulations. So permits could be secured and gold mining continued. Again, it has provided another layer of opportunity for rent seeking and corruption in the issuing of permits to continue that. And yes, given the huge difficulties that the vast majority of Zimbabweans are now facing, with almost 8 million people on lists as listed as food insecure at this juncture, we have seen more and more people trying their luck in the sector. Uh,
Right.
Interestingly enough, we've seen a significant decrease in the volume of gold coming into the formal buying system, and this is matched by what we see an increase in smuggling,
Right.
as the prices secured in the smuggling arena are somewhat more attractive than they are from the central buying system.
Right. Let's get on to the value of this commodity. What is the value of gold to the Zimbabwean economy? What should it be a year? I think figures have been bandied around the media, and I think your report comes up with some pretty stunning figures about the cost of smuggling. Could you explain what the quantum? What is Zimbabwe losing from having an out of control gold mining sector at the moment?
Well, there's a figure flying around in the media that is extracted from the report, which is not based, I should hasten to add, on our own research, which is about that Zimbabwe is losing in terms of forex earnings about 1.5 billion a year.
Wow.
Uh, at the moment, Zimbabwe earns in terms of forex just under a billion a year through the official sales.
Right.
And this should have increased significantly during the course of this year with the rise in the gold price. But what we've
Sorry,
seen,
but you say that at the moment the official sales of gold from Zimbabwe are about a billion a year,
just under, yeah, about a
just
billion
under
a
a
year.
billion, right?
Yeah, and but
And
that
so,
that but that's been reduced this year as a result of the segue into more smuggling again. Uh, and the report looks at what we believe are some of the key reasons behind this burgeoning smuggling, and particularly a significant increase in smuggling through the United Arab Emirates. Much of the smuggling was coming down through South Africa before and into around refineries and out
mm,
that way. There appears to be a downtick in that at the moment, and a relative uptick in smuggling through to the UAE. We are informed, for example, throughout the COVID period that there has been a regular flurry of flights from Harare to the UAE carrying gold. And during our research, we spoke to people who had actively been involved in the smuggling industry, who talked about the carrying of suitcases full of gold out of the country on aeroplanes to Dubai and to South Africa.
is that because South Africa? I mean, the tilt from South Africa as a destination for smugglers to Dubai. What is the logic there? Is it because South African police are cracking down on smuggled gold from Zimbabwe?
Well, that may well be one reason, and we know there are a number of entities that are looking into this at the moment to try and understand why this has happened at this particular juncture. But certainly, it would make sense that a tightening up, which has been identified for some time, that this needs to be tightened up. Tightening up of security and processes in one area is going to lead to a displacement of illegal activity, and Dubai is the obvious choice, it would appear, to many in Zimbabwe, because it's been very open to receiving Zimbabwean gold without too many questions.
No
Uh,
questions asked,
well, not yet. They have their
and
systems,
no
Patrick.
taxes when you arrive in Dubai. you just straight through customs and then to the souk if you're interested in selling the gold.
Well, that's there are official systems in place in Dubai. The question is to what extent are they being followed through on, and we see from the LBMA, the London Bullion Market Association, that their responsible gold program, that they are looking very, very closely at the role that Dubai is playing in enabling the illegal market, not only from Zimbabwe but from many other parts of the world itself. And so this is part of an ongoing effort to tighten up responsible gold buying and gold sourcing. The report points to a discrepancy, for example, in official sales out of Zimbabwe to Dubai compared with the official receipts from Dubai on sales from Zimbabwe, a 7-ton discrepancy in 2018. And that's probably the tip of the iceberg. The exact quantum of how much is being smuggled is a contested area. A number of the people that we spoke to during the research argue that more gold is smuggled than go through the official system. And people were talking of figures of over 30 tons a year going out. We're not entirely sure how accurate that is, but the kind of figures that are being thrown around at the moment is that Zimbabwe is losing up to, as we said, 1.5 billion based on other people's research, but at least $100 million a month at the moment in terms of forex receipts. Now, that doesn't mean $100 million in earnings for the Zimbabwean government, but in terms of its need for liquidity of forex, that's critically important. What that would mean in terms of receipts from taxes and other revenue streams from the industry has not really been determined at this stage. But it's going to be another site of contestation. But really, unless we see an effective tightening up of the gold buying systems and the integrity of those systems, the leakages are going to continue.
You mentioned the Harare Dubai gold run. These flights, numerous flights between Harare and United Arab Emirates. About a month ago, a woman by the name of Henrietta Rushwaya was arrested at Robert Mugabe International Airport in Harare under rather bizarre circumstances. It seems that the closed-circuit cameras at the airport had been turned off when Madam Rushwaya arrived, and then events took a slightly bizarre turn. I wondered if you could tell us what happened and why this arrest and Rushwaya's subsequent detention has caused such a political furore in Zimbabwe.
Henrietta Rushwaya is the president of the Zimbabwe Miners Federation. This is the umbrella body that is responsible for representing artisanal and small-scale miners. I mean, this is as organized as the sector gets, and there's a significant level of disorganization there. She's a controversial character. Was elevated into the position after having been the president of ZIFA, the Zimbabwe's version of or local version of FIFA, and was allegedly involved in corrupt activities when she ran that outfit. She was found with 6 kilograms of gold in her handbag, having been ushered through customs and immigration by elements associated with the Central Intelligence Organization and immigration, people that work out of the office of the president. And she was left waiting to board an Emirates plane to Dubai, and when she was approached by members of military intelligence who then had her arrested. Now, they operated on a tip-off from what we can understand. And it would appear that this reflects some of the broader dynamics in play, factional dynamics in play between elements within the security sector themselves, but also different elements of interest that have interest within the gold sector. One of the things that we found during our research, particularly in the Midlands area, which is where President Mnangagwa comes from and where he is known euphemistically as the archbishop or the godfather of the gold sector, having been extracting what some describe to us as his chef's portion for many, many years. And this is where he secured much of his wealth, allegedly. When we were down there, we heard a number of stories about contestation between Mnangagwa's people and Chiwenga, the vice president's people, competing over areas of gold. So Rushwaya's arrest may well be seen in that context. She and the Zimbabwe Miners Federation had recently been given options to be involved in gold buying themselves, where they would be able to hoover up gold from the artisanal miners and officially put that through the RBZ's Fidelity Printer central gold buying system. The quality of the gold that was found on her was supposedly 99.9% pure and could have only been refined by the RBZ. And this has raised questions about the level of complicity within the RBZ in terms of smuggling dynamics that have been in play for some time. Again, another allegation that we heard from a number of people during the course of our research, that elements within the RBZ and its Fidelity Printers arm absolutely instrumentally involved with gold buyers out there in facilitating these smuggling dynamics that seem to be growing without any kind of significant pushback. What does Rushwaya's arrest mean, though, is yet to be seen. And some people see this potentially as a pruning operation to cut back on the number of people operating in the smuggling arena. And we've seen a number of other people have been arrested recently for smuggling. A white Zimbabwean down in the east of the country arrested, accused of working very closely with the Ministry of Mines officials in terms of enabling smuggling operations there. So, I think we're likely to see more activity at this stage, but how comprehensive and who benefits from that, of course, remains to be seen.
So we've got these two groups, political groups within the ruling party, ZANU-PF, pushing for supremacy. You're saying one seems to be supportive of President Emerson Mnangagwa, and the other is supportive of Constantino Chiwenga, the deputy president. There are also a lot of other very well connected business and political players. You mentioned earlier Kurakwash Tagarai, who is regarded by many as having the fastest growing business empire in the country, and appears to be important across a number of sectors, including banking and agriculture, and is also moving into the mining sector. South Africa's one of South Africa's big mining outfits, Metallon, run by Mzee Khumalo, was quite big in Zimbabwe. It lost its concession. Can you explain what happened there?
Well, I'll try and explain. I mean, there's a lot of unanswered questions about Metallon's experience, but certainly, 2 or 3 years ago, Metallon was seen as, with its 5 mines, gold mines in Zimbabwe, as the country's biggest industrial gold producer. They came in, invested a certain amount of money in some of those mines with a view to building capacity and production levels. And then towards the end of Mr. Mugabe's tenure in 2017, Khumalo appears to have been caught with his pants down in terms of illegally taking money out of the country, and was facing an investigation and charges in that respect. What we then saw following the coup in November was Metallon really saying a lot of very positive things about the mining sector and the gold mining sector and its plans for expansion with its gold mines. However, in the first quarter of 2018, Khumalo and Metalon were named by the Mnangagwa administration as one of the entities that had illegally taken money outside of the country. And from there on in, it would appear that there was a souring of relations between the new administration of Mnangagwa and with his new minister, Chitando, with Metalon itself. And any expectation that the charges that had arisen under the Mugabe administration kind of fell away. By September of 2018, some of the mines were in distress, and by April 2019, most of the mines, 4 of the mines, I think, had been put under care and maintenance, including one of the mines we looked at, Jumbo Mine, in the Mazoe area.
Right.
And then, of course, Metalon Metalon then took the RBZ to court, claiming that it had not received its money in terms of gold sales, which is a common concern raised by a number of the industrial miners, that they're not getting their payments back as quickly as they should do, which is affecting operations. After that press statement in May 2019, we didn't hear again as to what was going on with Metalon. We had the big mine invasions that were taking place, and Jumbo Mine outside Mazoe was one of the worst affected mines, with over 1,000 artisanal miners invading the mine at the time. And our attempts to get some kind of response from Metalon consistently failed. They just didn't respond to us as to what was going on with their court case against the RBZ. Were they selling their mines? And we've been trying to pick up dog ends from the media and from various other individuals about what's going on. And it would appear that Kudukwashi Tagurai and some of his business interests have been hoovering up some of these assets. Now, we don't know at what cost, what the deal was with Metalon, whether Khumalo was simply trying to cut his losses and get out, which appears to be the case. But all of this is very opaque and not clear at all. So it's an area that we need to keep looking at. But certainly the Metalon assets appear to be part of the newly acquired interests of Tagore's mining portfolio.
Great. Well, thanks for explaining that. Maybe we should then just take a look at the future, the directions of the gold industry, what we can see that's going on now, and what could be done to make it work better for Zimbabwe. I mean, from what you were saying about what Kudukwashi Tagore is trying to do, building up this mining arm to his business empire, do you think we're going to see a picture where some big financial and commercial interests, mainly Zimbabwean owned or Zimbabwean led, certainly, come into the sector in a formal way and try to kind of reassert some sort of order on the sector, push out the artisanal miners, and start getting some of those big mines working again on an industrial scale? Do you see any evidence of that happening? Well, and what would it mean if it did?
Well, no, we don't see any evidence of that really at the moment, because the kind of money that is involved here requires long-term investments. This is not an arena for quick pickings in terms of turning investments around into profits. So much will depend on the nature of the Zimbabwean entities that are involved. Now, Kuda Tagore may well have a long-term plan here in this sector, and part of addressing the challenges in the sector is about addressing the relationship between the larger scale operators and the artisanal sector. In our report, we've called for more work to be done on this, for a formalization of relations, particularly with artisanal groupings that have demonstrated a capacity for organization. But there needs to also be a development in that organization. Not everyone from the artisanal or small-scale mining sector is going to be accommodated. That has to be clear. But what we are waiting for is that regulatory framework. And the Mines and Mineral Act, we're promised, is going to be finalised this year. But to what extent that addresses the interests of the artisanal sector remains to be seen. It's been a major point of contestation during the on-off negotiations around the reform of this legislation over the last decade. And there's a great deal of political interest involved, particularly at a localized level. But the more formalized official mining sector, as you can imagine, as elsewhere in the world, is hesitant about a big embrace of the artisanal sector. So these things have to be worked out much more clearly. And as we see right now, there really isn't a clear framework for doing this, particularly in a context where the Ministry of Mines and Mineral Development is in such a parlous state, is accused of being responsible and involved in endemic corruption. And it's really not fit for purpose at this juncture. And it's deeply concerning, Patrick, that at a political level, we've had no political response to continual concerns that are being raised from different sectors, including the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Mines, and most recently a report released earlier in November by the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission about the levels of corruption inside the sector.
Yeah, Piers, I wondered if you could give us an update on those two things. Yeah, because there is an inquiry into the violence in the mining sector, parliamentary inquiry, I believe, that was put on hold earlier in the year and is due to restart. And also this anti-corruption commission, Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission report. I wondered if you could just briefly just tell us the status of those two operations and what they tell us about the mining sector at the moment.
Well, it's interesting. I was asking somebody this week for an update on exactly what was going on with the Portfolio Committee in terms of its investigation into mines. It conducted a number of interviews earlier in the year and then suspended operations, but has said very little about what it's going to do next. We are recommending in our report that it extends its investigations around violence and culpabilities from violence into the political arena to look at allegations of political connectivity to machete gangs and so forth. It seems very unlikely that that is going to happen. Certainly when we saw these issues being raised by opposition MPs earlier this year, they were poo-pooed and sort of kind of dismissed and swept under the carpet. It's not very helpful having a policing agency that is investigating criminality within the sector that really doesn't go beyond dealing with the folk that they pick up involved in violence and doesn't look at the political backdrop and some of the connectivities that are in play between some of these gangs and some of the political players. So we're ending up with a set of allegations against local and provincial and sometimes very senior political leaders, and a lack of hard evidence connecting those, or a will to investigate what for many would be a prima facie case. So we will have to wait and see what the Portfolio Committee does and whether it comes out with a robust report on the issue of violence and it connects it to a broader problem around the political economy. I have to say, Patrick, I'm not holding my breath that they're going to go down that route. With respect to the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, they've been looking at issues of corruption within the sector for much of this year. They have a limited resource capacity to do this, but they have launched investigations in Manicaland and in other provincial areas. And then we've had this report released last week, which is a real shot across the bows of the mining sector and the mines ministry, reflecting on endemic corruption. I mean, I'm trying to get a copy of the report right now so we can have a look at some detail in what's in there to see what can be followed up. But as I said earlier, the biggest concern I have at the moment is a complete lack of response from either the Ministry of Mines or indeed the presidency in relation to this issue. If Mnangagwa is really that interested in turning Zimbabwe into a $12 billion mining economy, as he has consistently promised as a central pillar of their efforts to create this upper middle class economy by 2030. If he does not address this issue, he is not going to have a hope in hell of getting anywhere near that kind of objective.
Perhaps we can just end up on some of the recommendations that your report is making, and how you think the mining sector should be addressed in the country, particularly this issue of the role of the Reserve Bank, Central Bank of Zimbabwe, and the current centralized system of gold buying, and how that could work a lot better and hopefully benefit the country in the longer term.
Well, I think, the primary challenge, and particularly in terms of the government's stated reform program, is to put in place a system that is attractive to and defends the interests of both international and domestic investors. This has not really been in place, and this requires tightening up the allocation of licensing and dealing with mining claims, putting in place an electronic cadastral system, which has been outstanding for over a decade. So, having a clearer regulatory framework with proper checks and balances and proper dispute resolution competencies is absolutely a critical foundation stone. In terms of, we've been looking at this sort of centralized buying system and arguing that as it's currently established, it's not fit for purpose, and the current organization and the lack of integrity inside that system warrants a rethink on how best to put in a gold buying system that has reach into the range of geographical areas where gold is being produced. I mean, one of the problems was not having enough centers in there, but having those checks and balances, which ensures you know where the gold is coming from, who's producing what. I mean, at this juncture, that kind of information is simply not on the table. So we can say, yes, the artisanal and small-scale mining sector produces 60% of Zimbabwe's gold, but we can't say from where. Which part of the ASM sector is doing that? Who is effective? Who is not effective? So they need to strengthen up those kinds of oversights and checks and balances around the gold buying system. These would be two critical points. The other area of recommendation, which we've already mentioned, is to have a deeper dive investigating mine violence and violence in the sector, which we see as symptomatic of these broader problems around political economy, a lack of a regulatory framework and proper checks and balances on a criminal justice system operating effectively. And a key area of recommendation for us is to explore options for cooperation between larger scale operations and artisanal miners. At the end of the day, there is an understanding that mining requires a broader based beneficiation. This was part of the logic behind the controversial indigenization policies that were pursued during the Mugabe era and which have been pushed to one side under the Mnangagwa administration. But there are opportunities to get many more people involved, and this requires organization of the artisanal sector, a skilling of that sector, and this in turn requires innovative interaction and cooperation between large-scale and artisanal miners. And as I was saying earlier before, not everyone is going to benefit from those processes. There's some comparative learning from other jurisdictions which could be brought in, but there are large-scale miners that are willing to explore these options, but are not going to be told what to do in terms of some kind of command politics from a politically connected artisanal sector. The other area that we are also suggesting related to that is civil society groups to help build civil society interaction with the artisanal sector. There's some experience of that in Zimbabwe, particularly with organizations such as the Zimbabwe Environmental Lawyers Association, which has played a very important role in trying to connect the dots there within the sector. But certainly those kind of initiatives could be strengthened, and that's an area where we would like to see more donor support. And we think that external parties, and this is an important area, can also use the reform and the health of the mining sector as almost a litmus test to help assess progress with reform. We've seen in Zimbabwe that it's become a site of binary narratives of crisis, no crisis, reform, no reform. And the gold sector provides a useful example, a useful litmus test to assess government's commitments in terms of progress towards building an accountable mining sector that does have this broader-based beneficiation, but that also tackles the challenges that we've been referring to throughout this conversation around corruption, political patronage, and so forth. Key governance concerns that are central to moves on the African Union with the African peer review mechanism, something that Zimbabwe has agreed to sign up to, and in terms of the concerns that are being expressed more locally in the region by South Africa about the governance deficits in Zimbabwe. So we think this is a useful arena to try and measure progress and deficits moving forward.
And that's all for this week. Our thanks to Piers Pigou of the International Crisis Group. And if you've enjoyed this week's podcast, please head to iTunes or wherever you listen and give us a 5-star review. And if you want to sign up to our 5-bullet morning briefing, do head to theafricareport.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope to hear from you soon.